little drunken hour, hooting at the clock. Welcome to our live stream, OG After Dark. Little drunken hour, hooting on the clock. Welcome to our live stream, OG After Dark.
There he is, the little drunken owl. It's been a minute since we've done an OG After Dark. I am here at Carter-Finley Stadium. NC State loses to Duke 29-19. The Wolfpack fall 2-5-5 on the season. Duke now 7-3, and if we had a budget, there would be the triangle chain with the 8-4 arms on the clock. Maybe I'll figure out how to get there. That Manny Diaz would be wearing right now in the locker room and spraying water around that Carter-Finley Stadium visitor locker room, because Duke now has wins over UNC and NC State. So they're 7-3 on the season. Congratulations to Manny Diaz on the revenge tour, which is now kind of sort of complete, right? Beats Mac Brown in a game against Carolina earlier this year. He ends up beating Florida State, where he once coached, and now he beats NC State, where he also once coached. Yes, I hear you. He did not beat Miami, but hey, man, 3-4 ain't bad. So Duke improves to 7-3 on the year. They are your triangle good champions for 2024. But now, the reason that you're here. There is no other way to put it. And I really do not care what NC State does against North Carolina in the finale. This season is a failure. This season is nothing short than a disaster for Dave Doran. NC State 5-5, home losses to Duke and Wake Forest. This is a team that went into the year with hopes and dreams, lollipops, rainbows, whatever you want to call it, of making the college football playoff. Obviously, that did not happen. To the point where they can't even beat Wake Forest or Duke at home. NC State, 5-5 on the year. Tonight was a complete and total failure in terms of play calling. It was a complete and total failure in terms of being prepared for your final home game of the year. It was a complete and total failure in clock management, timeout management, which somehow in year 12, Dave Doran still does not know how to manage his timeouts. Really, I don't know what other way there is around this other than to say this. So here's NC State after a 29-19 home loss to Duke on the year now. NC State in ACC play. They're 2-4 with wins at California, thanks to a missed 30-yard field goal, and then a 59-28 win over Stanford at home. Every other ACC team they've played, they've lost to. They have 2 ACC games left: Georgia Tech and North Carolina. Obviously, Joe Ovius is not here today. He is in hockey dad mode, so I am here today. If you have comments, I will get to them on the stream here. But I would just say to you this. When NC State loses to Tennessee in their NIL budget, I can understand that. When NC State loses to Clemson and all of the advantages that Clemson has, I can understand that. Florida State, Virginia Tech. How about Carolina? When I think of teams that have and programs that have an advantage over NC State, I put North Carolina in that category. I understand when NC State loses to those teams. I can't think of a single reason for NC State to lose to Duke in football. Not a single one. They've now lost in consecutive years to Duke to 2 different coaches in 2 different ways. I can't think of a single excuse for that. Losing to Clemson, got it. Losing to the teams who have more than you, got it. Losing to Wake Forest and Duke on your home field, I can't think of a single excuse for that. I can't think of a single reason for that, to be perfectly honest with you. So here's NC State. What do you do? And I know a lot of people want to talk about Dave's future. The buyout is $16 million. I do not think NC State is going to move on from Dave Doran, whose contract runs through the 2029 season. I do think it is well past time to move on from Robert and I as your offensive coordinator. I don't get Garrett Tujay and what they've done on the offensive line again tonight. Now, Duke is a good defensive football team, but looking at the stats here, NC State ran the ball 29 times for 84 yards. I mean, that's your offensive line. There's no other way to put that. That's embarrassing. Again, you're talking about Duke. You're not talking about a juggernaut here. So for NC State, I think it's well past time that they figure out a way. Now, in what will be year 13 for Dave Doran, here is the ultimate question. Is this the offensive coordinator after Matt Canada, after Eli Drinkwitz, after Tim Beck, and now after Robert and I? Is this the one he'll hire and just let him coach the offense and maximize their opportunities? I think I think Eli Drinkwitz came the closest to that in those 17 and 18 seasons. But I think it would be a fool's errand to sit here and think, okay, get rid of Robert and I, bring in a new offensive coordinator. And let's be honest, after it's Robert and I, who's an older coach, you're probably going to hire a younger coach to call the offense next year. And you know that younger coach is going to feel a certain way to listen to the head coach. I get that. But at some point, and yes, it's year 13, the head coach has to look at himself in the mirror and say, I am going to let the play caller call the plays and try to win the football game in the best way possible. Kicking field goals is not the best way possible. And I could see the hamster in the cage while it was 12-9. Oh, if we just kick 2 more field goals, we'll win this game 15-12. No, sir. No, sir. That was not going to happen today. And the kicker actually missed the field goal when State was down 7. Turned to my family and I said, I'm not even sure what that would have gotten you because you're down 7. Were you going to score a touchdown to win the football game in the fourth quarter? I mean, so there is some self-reflection that is needed. And I understand the frustration as a fan base. I understand that more was expected. I would also say this. I would caution this. I'm not on the side of, well, if you get rid of the coach, who are you going to get? Look at Kirk Cignetti in Indiana. There was not a single person in Bloomington, Indiana last year going, who we really need? It's Kirk Cignetti. There was not one person saying that. So I would caution against the idea of, and I know it's mostly Carolina fans. I know it's mostly people who do not like State saying, well, who are you going to get? Who are you going to get that's better? I can't stand that argument. So I'm not going to advance that argument, but I would just say to you, Dave Doran is going to be back for his 13th season. The question now is, how do you help him help himself? Right? Was it Jerry Maguire? Help me, help you. All right, let's get to some comments now. And I apologize here. Oh, we have a listener. Now, listen, I'm going to bring you on, listener. It doesn't say your name. Oh, gone. Okay, never mind. I was going to bring you on. I tweeted it out, just so you know. I'm in the trust tree here. If you'd like to come on, turn your camera on, and join our conversation here on the After Dark, I'm more than willing to do that. We have no rules, so you can curse. It's welcome, even. But let's let's get to some of your comments here on the chat. Okay, let's see what everyone's got to say. Appreciate everyone for joining us here on OG Media on the After Dark. Ken, my man Ken, I wonder if Jaleo wishes he had some brown liquor now. How did you know, Ken, that I was offered by my guy Brandon Witt? Shout out to Brandon in the parking lot before the game. He goes, he showed me the Blantons. He goes, "Hey man, you want some of the good stuff?" And I said, "No, no, no. I got to make it to the After Dark." This was at 12. I said, "There ain't no way I'm getting to the After Dark if I drink Blantons right now." But shouts to Brandon there on the edge of the Carter-Finley Woods there. He's got a great tailgate setup. And I know a lot of state fans who are now back out in the parking lot commiserating with the concept of, well, what we had this year was a great tailgate. So that's true. All right. Yeah, man. Bow down to your triangle overlord, Julio. Hey, man, Duke, talk your talk. I'm here for it. That is really what makes us great here in the triangle. You know, Mike DeCourcy, who I have tremendous respect for, tries to say that Louisville and Kentucky, that's the Cincinnati is the center of the college basketball universe, but it can never be, because there aren't those schools with the proximity that we have here. And yes, as many of my Duke friends remember from the Final Eight, there was a salute. You are welcome to give me the salute back, because that is what we're all about. When you have your moment, you take advantage of it. When you have the chance to talk your shit, you talk your shit. So Martin, you're right. Bow down to your triangle overlord. All right. Ken, again, is Duke this king? Yes, they are. They absolutely are. All right. Jay Ray, biggest letdown in Dave's tenure? Absolutely. Yeah, if you go back in year one, they go 3-9, winless for the only time in school history in conference play. That's disappointing, obviously. But when you have a transition from one coach to another, you don't necessarily expect great things. 2019, while I could argue until I die, and I can if you'd like me to, the injuries weren't the problem with the 2019 team when they won one ACC game. There were a lot of injuries. So you can explain that away. This year, I can't explain this type of failure other than this. I did caution at the beginning of the year. There was so much put into the Tennessee game and the Clemson game that I worried if they lost those games, he would lose the team. I don't necessarily think it played out that way, but I do think that when so much emphasis was put on those two games, there was going to be a natural letdown. Now, the quarterback situation, if Grayson McCall had been the quarterback from game one to now game 10, I would say to you, there was probably more of a chance than that happening. But the quarterback situation definitely was part of the equation here. All right. Yeah, you're right, Jay Ray. We didn't even start our best quarterback for the first half of the season. This is true. We've been over this in the sense that they went in the portal. They got Grayson McCall. It is my understanding that the two highest paid players on the team are Grayson McCall and Kevin Concepcion. I think the number one issue that college coaches, particularly in the triangle, where you have no margin of error, are going to have to learn is positional value and wins above replacement value. Meaning you can't duplicate position payments, which ECU did this year with two quarterbacks. Meaning NC State, you can't pay Kevin Concepcion and then bring in 3 receivers, really, in Grimes, Rogers, Jonathan Paylor, don't forget, who they had to pay to get out of high school, and now Justin Jolie, their tight end. You have to diversify your investment, and I would suggest offensive line would be on the top of the priority list, and not just because you're going to have to. It looks like you're going to have to replace 5 starters, but it looks like you should almost certainly be looking for a new offensive line coach. But I think the old idea of, and Dave's trying to solve this in real time. His strength is finding players like a CJ Bailey that go under the radar and then developing them. And under the old model, you get a kid like Bailey, you keep him, you develop him. By the end, he looks like $1 million. Bradley Chubb, Garrett Bradbury. Pick an example. Jacoby Myers. Name a player that they've had ultra success with and developed and sent to the NFL. These are all great examples. That model, though, has changed. And you've seen a lot of older coaches get out of this game, right? Or you've seen someone, his contemporary, his peer in Mike Houston, get fired at ECU because, quite frankly, he couldn't handle the change. I don't want the end to come for Sean Clark, but the end could come for Sean Clark as well at App State. So the question becomes, how do you adjust and adapt in this new world? That's the big question. And I think that's where these coaches have had the biggest problem. And NC State does have a general manager for their football team. I do not know the exact duties and how they're laid out for the general manager. You would hope that that general manager is explaining to the head coach, explaining and working with the collective about the positions that you should invest in, because let's be honest, NC State has a limited budget, and should be explaining the concept of, well, we can let player X go, kind of like the Hurricanes. We can let a guy go and sign a bunch of Scott Hattebergs, right? The math has to math. B-Rex, Anai needs to go. Now, I agree with this, but for those who missed the start of our very special OG After Dark, even if Anai goes, and I suspect he will, Dave needs to make an adjustment in terms of, can I trust the play caller to not only call plays, but get out of his way? The real strength for Dabo Swinney. Remember, he lost to Skip Holtz and USF in his first full year in the Charlotte Meineke Car Care Bowl, right? Like, that's not great. Clemson should never lose to USF in a bowl game. He learned to get out of his own way, and he hired Chad Morris, and the trajectory of that program changed forever. Same when he brought in Brent Venables on the defensive side after they lost to West Virginia, giving up 70 points in a bowl game. So Dabo, in his first 3 years, learned how to get out of the way. I think it's fair to question, and it's fair to question our own sanity to think that somebody in year 13 is going to learn new tricks. It doesn't sound right. You know what I mean? Like, why would you change in year 13? Now, one coach who did do that was Bill Cowher with the Pittsburgh Steelers. He learned how to adjust. He learned how to have a second act of his career. Dave Doran's going to need a third act of his career. Because if you break it down by 13 through 19 as the first act, you're talking about a guy who struggled, to be perfectly honest with you. Had 2 bad years out of those 7. Since then, and to Boo Corrigan's credit, went to him after the 19 season and said to Dave Doran, how can I help you? And coming into this year, they had a 4-year run that was the second best in the ACC. Now, they didn't have a division title to show for that. They did not have an appearance in the ACC championship game to show for that. They did not have a conference or a 10-game season to show for that, but they had success. So, all right, MG, let me try this. We'll get back to the comments here. I'm going to put you on the spot here, MG. Are you here? Nope, no MG. I think maybe you were trying to get on. I sent that thing out. Just so you know, the link that I sent out is the link that we send to our guests to join us. So if you're interested in getting on this podcast and having your voice heard, please, by all means, help yourself. All right, let's get back to some more of the comments. Let's go to Chilton. Chilton, I am mostly over Dave Doran, but he did not have all of those drop passes today. Yeah, I mean, execution is part of the equation for sure. But I mean, really, I'm going to go back to this comment right here. The game management is just surprisingly bad, and this stuff is scripted. They use a game man. They believe it or not, they use a service where it tells you when to go for two, tells you how to manage the clock. It goes through. They pay a lot of money for it too. They, this is all stuff they go through in practice. And I'm with you, Jay Ray. The timeout management is kind of shocking. Not sure the outcome would be different, but it is still head scratching. Yeah, if you did not follow the game today, NC State used two of their timeouts early in the third quarter when they're down 7 late. They didn't have one. They didn't really have the full complement to use. One of the timeouts was whether they were going to kick a field goal or not, which they ended up doing to tie the game at 12-12, which was absolutely the right call, but whew, it's a lot. All right, let's fire through some of these. Martin, Giglio is so salty, laughing my ass off. Yeah, man. I mean, I am and I'm not salty. I know who Dave is after 12 years. And again, to repeat myself, I can understand if NC State loses to Clemson. I can understand if NC State loses to Florida State, Tennessee, Virginia Tech, Carolina. You can't give me a reason for NC State losing to Duke and Wake Forest at home. There ain't one. So does that make me salty? Fair enough. But it's also the fucking truth, Martin. All right, we got Hilton already. Let's go Guinness Toucan. The tone was set on the first two offensive plays for State. Yeah, gotta invest in the O-line in the portal. Yes, I do believe there is part of that. All right, let's get to the Duke side. Ben, Manny Diaz has turned into one heck of a coach this season, just like we all expected. Listen, I was clear after their 5-1 start that I thought Manny showed a lot of progress, not only from his time at Miami, but even earlier in his career. That's a credit to him. And I do not think Duke is a juggernaut, but I do think they are good defensively, which is the DNA of the type of teams that he wants. They're also a team that minimizes their own mistakes. They've created a lot of turnovers this year. And if you're not familiar with Manny's career arc, he was a grad assistant with Florida State and Chuck Amato. Then he coached with Chuck at Florida State. When Chuck got the job here at State, he was an assistant here. And then ultimately ended up, he had a couple different stops, Middle Tennessee, Mississippi State, notably got fired after a 2-game start to a season with Texas and Mac Brown. Ends up back at Miami with Mark Richt. And when Mark Richt was unwilling to fire his son, I believe, Miami ultimately turned to Manny to be their head coach. He was better in that 3-year stretch at Miami than anyone gave him credit for, but he was not nationally relevant. He was more of triangle good with Miami rather than nationally relevant good. Subsequently, after leaving Miami, he goes to Penn State. He's with James Franklin. He has 2 outstanding defenses at Penn State, which gets him back to this job at Duke. And my primary objection to Duke hiring him was they had Mike Elko, who I believe is at the tippy top of a list of best coaches in the country. And I found it hard to believe that they would follow a strategist like Elko, with someone like Manny, who, quite frankly, is um, he's a recruiter, he's a motivator, but he's not someone who's going to dial it up and beat you with his X's and O's. So good for him for learning his lessons. This is not a team that makes mistakes the same way that Miami and NC State did back in the day under Amato with the dumb penalties. So Duke definitely has that going for them. But I wasn't wrong about what Manny was before he got here. Manny, to his credit, has changed and adapted, as we talked about the challenge that is ahead of Dave. All right. Curtis Driver, the season of ineptitude. Yeah, I mean, there's really no other way to put it. Chilton again, year 1 versus year 12. Yeah, I'll say this about year 1 versus year 12. As we saw with Syracuse a couple of weeks ago, there's a new car smell for year 1 when a guy comes in. Now, if you want to go back and blame Dave for having a fucking terrible year 1, you can. But most coaches have a fairly successful year 1 because it's usually a program that. Now, how did you get the job to begin with? Well, the previous guy was not good enough, right? In this case with Duke, Elko had done a pretty good job of instilling a mindset and a toughness, particularly on defense. My understanding is Duke's NIL budget is significant, maybe even double what NC State's is. And they've done a good job. They clearly, Murphy was $1 million, I was told. That's a pretty good chunk. That's 3 times what State paid for McCall, if you're keeping track at home. So I think Nina King specifically hired Manny knowing that his strength would be recruiting and working the portal. And I think Nina is the one who deserves credit as an AD for being smart enough to hire a coach like Mike Elko and being able to pivot and say, I'm going to get a guy like Manny Diaz who's going to help us in this portal and NIL era. So I would just caution you, particularly when you get to year 12, it's not always going to be this, right? There's not always going to be infinite growth. You're going to have ups and downs. And my gripe with Dave is not the ups and downs. It is when you have a chance. And it's the same thing I said to Tom O'Brien, one of my all-time favorite Tom O'Brien stories, which I'll tell here on the After Dark. My all-time favorite Tom O'Brien story. They lose to Maryland, and I wrote in the News and Observer the next day, you have to make hay when the sun shines. They lose to Maryland. Torrey Smith lights them up. A game that Tebby Yao still holds against Tom O'Brien 15 years later, okay? And I said to him, I wrote in the paper, you have to make hay while the sun shines. Tom, I just so happened to see Tom the next day at Clues over off of Western and Avon Ferry. And he says to me, quote, this is a quote, hey, asshole, the sun's going to shine for a long time. And I said, okay. I said, I've been here longer than you. And just so you know, that window ain't always open. That sun ain't always out, Annie. So you better take advantage of your chances while you can. And obviously Tom could not. And Dave has not, quite frankly. He had the window open in 17 and 18, could not take advantage. 22, 21, 22, 23, all years that he could have had an advantage in and did not make that hay while the sun was shining. Tell that asshole, hey, asshole. And you wonder why I love Tom the way that I still do all these years later. All right, Brian, and we'll keep working through these comments, guys. Appreciate you all for joining me here on the OG After Dark. If you haven't yet, hit that like button, please. Subscribe for us on the YouTubes. I would appreciate it. Okay, this is interesting. I haven't thought of it this way yet. Brian, I have a lingering suspicion that Dave Doran pulls a Tony Bennett after this season for similar-ish reasons. Seems like the type. It's only the contract that makes me doubt it. Well, I'll say this. I think, again, Dave's real strength is finding and developing players. And when that's taken away from you, it's hard to adjust. His contract runs through the 29 season. Let me do the quick Googles on Dave, even though I think he's going to be 52 in December. Let me just make sure I have that right for you. Because he is close to my age. I'm turning 50 in April. I'm pretty sure he's a year older than me. Let's see. He's 52 right now, so he'll turn 53 in December. I don't think Dave will coach much more past 55, to be perfectly honest with you. But this is like when people would say to me, well, when I would say, what's John Swofford still the ACC commissioner for? What does he have left to do? The people who worked in Greensboro would tell me, it's pretty hard to walk away from that $3 million a year, Joe. And I would suggest to you that, yes, Dave Doran already has generational wealth for him and his family and his children. But it would be hard to walk away in the next 2 years from $11 million, right? I mean, shit, man, I ain't walking away from 5.5 per year. You're going to drag my ass out of here, especially if you owe me. If I was owed 16 until 29, it would have to be there would have to be some kind of sweetener there, or it would truly have to be a situation where you're fed up and you have enough. It's not a bad thought though. All right, I am not gonna John Old. No, sir. Come on, man. You can't do that. Uh, even I have a line. All right, magnified plaid 29. Chilio, love the rowback fit. Only thing positive from the game today, yeah, my guy Ben was here. Shouts to my guy Ben from Rowback Day, who's a state grad, by the way. They have some great stuff coming for state, not only next year but in March. Yeah, so Gene showing me how is there no ACC Triangle Championship. We worked on that. We workshopped it this week on the OG. A triangle clock that you'd wear like the old Miami turnover chain, right? We'll have to get Manny's jeweler to work on that for us. But back to my rowback people real quick. They have some unbelievable stuff coming out in 2025, not only for NC State, but also Carolina. I know RJ Davis is their spokesman. They have some really, really cool stuff that will be state and Carolina specific, but also ACC and Raleigh specific. The ACC one is going to be called the AV cart. And anyone who grew up in the state of North Carolina is going to want that rowback swag. So Magnify, appreciate you, man. Let's see. Joe Corey, so much for UNC being a loser leaves town match. Yeah, I kind of thought, I thought State was going to win today. And then we would have that perfect symmetry of the Spider-Man pointing all the different ways, right? Duke would beat Carolina, State would beat Duke, and then Carolina would beat State. Obviously, did not work out that way. I think I answered this, Joe. His contract runs through 29. So 25, 26, 27, 28, 29. He's got 5 years left. My math has him at 16.5 mil on the hook. From Ken, BJ Barham is probably playing I Hope He Breaks Your Heart somewhere tonight. And it seems fitting how many hearts Dave Doran broke tonight. Yeah, Dave's catching this one. Coaching malpractice. Yep, started with 2 RPOs from the 4 to start the game. Yeah, the safety was something else, man. Not quite sure who gets the blame for that one, but we'll see how it goes. All right, Z, triangle success. Yes, sir. I see you. It is triangle success for the Blue Devils this year. Brian, willing to give an eye another year, but only if Bailey stays. He needs continuity. Again, I would disagree in the sense that I think new voices can help. And even when Beck came in his first year, when he was really good, actually, because he had to scramble and they had Bailey Hockman. It was a pandemic. It was injuries to Devin Leary. Even when Beck came in, he used the terminology from the previous staff. So you don't necessarily have to change everything with a new play caller. I understand the totality of Robert and I's resume. If Andy Reid could come during the bye week and help out his old BYU teammate with some play calls, I'd say I'm all for it. But obviously, that hasn't been the case. Okay. Awaken. Even with more talent, we are still the only team in NCC in NC to not play for the ACC championship. Wake Forest has gone twice and won in 06. Something needs to change. Just don't know what. Yeah, I mean, listen. There is something to the basement that Dave Doran has established, right? Like you have to give him credit for the 7-5, 8-4 seasons. But it's been that breakthrough that's been missing. And I think that's a natural frustration for the fan base, even understanding that the dice were loaded from the start. Not being on that coastal side was a significant disadvantage. So I'm willing to show some grace on that front. Now, 22, when Pittsburgh wins the league by beating Wake Forest, there's no excuse. Last year, when Louisville goes because they came back from 10-0 at the half, there's no excuse. So these are all the things that you have to work through. So, all right. Okay. Joseph Webb. Dave hasn't beat no one. I mean, no one. Crappy Carolina. Clemson doesn't matter. Yeah, I know what you're saying, that the signature wins have been far and few between, but you can't say no one. The Carolina team in 16 in particular was pretty good. The Carolina team, even last year, in the last 2 years, are actually pretty good. Clemson, yes, has been down in the years that State beat them. No other way around that. Totally get that. All right, Mr. Jim Wright. Do you think Malik Murphy stays at Duke? I do. I do. Murphy hasn't been great. And this is going to be the fascinating part of NIL deals. And where does the hometown discount begin and where does it end? My understanding is they paid him $1 million this year. They have not gotten $1 million worth of quarterback play out of him. Now, he's been good, but he hasn't been great. I would think they would be able to go back to him, bring him back, maybe even at a discounted rate, because he's now not the same commodity that left Texas and commanded $1 million. So I think they have a pretty good chance of hanging on to Murphy, and even probably at that discounted rate, certainly compared to what State's probably going to have to pay for CJ Bailey. In part with CJ Bailey, because who's going to want to come after him? Miami, Ohio State. All right, Jay Ray. Tom and Dave's records are remarkably similar in all aspects except for length of tenure. Yellow pad, that shit. Yeah, man. I mean, I've done this before. Tom and Dave, through 6 years, were remarkably similar. And, Debbie, when she had moved on from Tom, was looking for someone who would recruit in a different way than Tom did. She was looking for somebody younger. I think she was looking for somebody who would do more in the state of North Carolina, to be perfectly honest with you, and would, there was a personality conflict between her and Tom. So I don't think you need the yellow pad for that. I think we all know the answer to that. So, All right, guys. Again, NC State. That's going to do it for us. We're going to wrap it up here. NC State loses 29-19. They're now 5-5 on the year. Duke, congratulations. You are the Triangle champions for 2024. We'll get to your phone calls on Monday on the OG proper. And if you're an OG fan, you have tomorrow to look forward to. There's a panic room. Joe Obius, Lauren Brownlow, they will take care of you tomorrow with all of their reactions. So appreciate everyone for joining me here. Sorry there wasn't better news, but the drunk owl was asked for, and the drunk owl delivers. See you guys on Monday on the
Little drunken owl, hooting at the cloud. Welcome to our live stream, OG After Dark. Little drunken owl, hooting on the cloud. Welcome to our live